Hey everyone, and a massive welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely pumped to have you here. Are you ready to crack wide open one of the most fascinating questions in all of science? Today we are diving deep into Chapter 7 of your NCERT textbook, How Do Organisms Reproduce? I mean, think about it. From tiny, invisible single cells to massive banyan trees, and yes, even us humans. This is the epic story of how life literally continues itself, generation after generation. So grab your notebooks, focus those minds, and let's master this concept completely.
Quickly, here's our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 6 key stops. 1. The blueprint of life. 2. Asexual modes of reproduction. 3. The power of 2. 4. Reproduction in flowering plants. 5. Human reproduction and puberty. And finally, 6. Reproductive health and contraception. Let's do this.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the blueprint of life. To really understand reproduction, you have to think of it as copying a master recipe for life. At its core, reproduction is all about creating a copy of DNA inside the cell. Cells use complex chemical reactions to build these DNA copies. But here's the catch, and this directly answers a brilliant question right from your textbook. Why is variation beneficial to the species, but not necessarily for the individual? Well, you see, when DNA copies itself, the process isn't always 100% perfect. Tiny mistakes or variations pop up. Now, sometimes a variation is so drastic that the new DNA copy simply cannot work with the cell's machinery, and unfortunately that individual newborn cell will die. So variation wasn't great for that specific individual, right? But on the flip side, many variations are super subtle. Over time, these slight differences accumulate across a population. If the environment suddenly changes, say a huge temperature spike, these slight differences might be the exact tools a few individuals need to survive the heat. So while a drastic variation might harm an individual, this inbuilt tendency for variation is literally the ultimate survival insurance for the entire species over time.
Moving right along to Section 2, Asexual modes of reproduction.
Now that we know about DNA copying, let's look at how organisms with simpler body designs reproduce. This brings us to asexual reproduction, where just a single parent is all it takes to create a whole new generation. Let's tackle an important exercise question right here. How does binary fission differ from multiple fission? Well, for unicellular organisms, cell division leads directly to the creation of a new individual. In binary fission, an organism splits into exactly 2 equal halves. Bi means 2, right? But in multiple fission, an organism, like the malarial parasite Plasmodium, divides into many daughter cells all at the exact same time.
Notice the sequence of binary fission in the amoeba. First, the master control, the nucleus in the center, begins to lengthen and divide. Once the nucleus is split, the cytoplasm of the cell begins to pinch right in the middle. Finally, it completely separates, giving us 2 equal, fully independent amoeba cells. And a super fun fact about the amoeba, this splitting can take place in absolutely any plane.
But fission isn't the only asexual method out there. Remember activity 7.1 in your book, the one where you dissolve sugar in water and add some yeast? The sugar provides rich nutrition, which prompts the yeast to rapidly reproduce through a process called budding. Organisms like Hydra use budding too. A specific part of their body just grows out as a bud, develops into a tiny individual, and then gracefully detaches to live independently. Then we have plants. Many plants use vegetative propagation. Take the bryophyllum plant. It actually grows tiny buds right on the margins of its leaves. When these leaves fall to the damp soil, the buds grow into whole new plants. This method is a real game changer for agriculture. It allows us to grow plants like bananas, roses, and jasmine that have completely lost their capacity to produce seeds. Plus, plants grown this way bear flowers and fruits much earlier, and they are nearly exact genetic copies of the parent plant.
Which brings us to Section 3, the power of 2. Asexual reproduction is highly efficient, for sure, but it relies on a single parent. What if organisms came up with a reproductive mode that allowed more and more variation to be generated? We established earlier that making variations during simple DNA copying is a pretty slow process. If the cell tried to speed it up by making wild, inaccurate copies, the newborn cells would just die. So how does nature speed up the creation of safe, healthy variations? It combines DNA from 2 different individuals. Because both individuals already have harmless variations accumulated from previous generations, combining them creates a completely novel, unique combination of variants without those fatal errors. This, my friends, is the absolute superpower of sexual reproduction.
Let's step it up a notch with Section 4, Reproduction in Flowering Plants. Let's see this power of 2 in action, starting with the beautiful world of angiosperms, or flowering plants. The flower is actually the reproductive center of the plant. Inside a bisexual flower, you have both male and female parts sitting right there. The stamen is the male part, producing that yellowish powder you've probably gotten on your fingers, pollen grains. The pistil, sitting right smack in the center, is the female reproductive part. Now, for reproduction to happen, the pollen must reach the pistil. If pollen from a stamen falls onto the pistil of the exact same flower, we call it self-pollination. But if agents like the wind, water, or buzzing bees carry that pollen to a totally different flower, that is cross-pollination.
Let's zoom in a bit on the female part, the pistil. At the very top is the sticky stigma. This is literally the landing pad for the pollen. Below that is the elongated tube called the style. And right at the swollen bottom is the ovary, which safely houses the ovules and the egg cells. Now let's clear up a classic textbook exercise question that always trips people up. How is pollination different from fertilization? Well, pollination is simply the transfer of the pollen to the stigma. That's just step 1. Once it lands, the pollen grain grows a long tube all the way down through the style to reach the ovary. Down there, the male germ cell fuses with the female egg cell. This actual fusion of the germ cells is called fertilization. It creates a zygote which will eventually grow into a brand new seed. So just remember, pollination is the journey and fertilization is the destination.
Next up, Section 5, Human Reproduction and Puberty.
We've seen how plants do it. Now let's talk about us. Human beings also reproduce sexually, but our bodies go through a very specific and sometimes confusing preparation phase first. Growing up involves incredible changes. During early adolescence, the rate of general body growth actually begins to slow down, and the body's resources shift heavily toward maturing the reproductive tissues. We call this period puberty. There are changes common to everyone. New, thick hair growth in armpits and the genital area, thinner hair on arms and legs, and skin that often gets oily, which might bring a few pimples. Listen, it's all completely natural. There are also specific changes. For girls, breast size begins to increase and menstruation begins. For boys, facial hair appears and their voices begin to crack. All of these changes are just signals, identifiable markers, that sexual maturation is taking place.
Let's look at the male reproductive system. The core organs here are the testes. They have a vital job, producing the male germ cells, the sperms. As the sperms travel out through a tube called the vas deferens, they pass by 2 very important structures, the seminal vesicles and the prostate gland. Your textbook asks, what is their role? Well, these glands add their own special fluid to the mix. This fluid makes the transport of the sperms much easier and, incredibly importantly, provides them with the nutrition they need for their long journey.
Now let's trace the female reproductive system. It starts with the ovaries, which produce the female germ cells, or eggs. Every single month, an ovary releases an egg. This egg is gently carried along by the fallopian tube, which curves downwards to connect to an elastic, bag-like structure in the center. This is the uterus, and this is exactly where a baby will develop. If sexual reproduction occurs, the sperms travel up into the fallopian tube, where they just might meet the egg. If fusion happens, boom, we have fertilization. The resulting embryo travels down and embeds itself into the wall of the uterus, which has purposely thickened its lining with a rich blood supply to welcome it. This brings us to another crucial textbook question. How does the embryo get nourishment? The answer is a brilliant, highly specialized tissue called the placenta. It's like a disc embedded in the uterine wall. It has these tiny, finger-like villi that create a massive surface area. This allows glucose and oxygen to pass from the mother's blood directly to the growing embryo, and it allows the embryo to pass its waste back to the mother's blood to be safely cleared away. This incredible nurturing environment supports the baby for approximately 9 months.
But wait, what if fertilization does not take place? What happens to that egg? Well, the egg lives for about 1 day. Remember, the uterus prepared a thick, spongy lining richly supplied with blood, expecting a fertilized egg to arrive. If no embryo arrives, this thick lining is simply not needed anymore. So it slowly breaks down and exits the body through the vagina as blood and mucus. This incredibly natural cycle occurs roughly every month and is known as menstruation, usually lasting for 2 to 8 days.
This brings us to our final stop, Section 6, Reproductive Health and Contraception.
With sexual maturity comes immense responsibility, making contraception absolutely critical.
The sexual act inherently has the potential to lead to pregnancy, and pregnancy places massive demands on a woman's body and mind, so understanding how to manage reproductive health and avoid unwanted pregnancies is vital. There are several categories of contraceptive methods. First, we have mechanical barriers, like condoms, which physically block the sperm from ever reaching the egg. Second, hormonal methods. These are usually oral pills that change the hormonal balance of the body so an egg isn't even released. However, because they alter hormones, they can sometimes have side effects. Third, we have intrauterine devices, or IUDs, like the loop or the copper T. These are placed directly inside the uterus by a doctor to prevent pregnancy, though they can sometimes cause irritation. Finally, surgical methods. If the vas deferens in males or the fallopian tube in females is surgically blocked, it completely stops the transfer of germ cells. While very safe in the long run, any surgery carries a risk of infection if not done properly.
Let's test your conceptual clarity right now with a direct question from your chapter exercises. If a woman is using a copper T, will it help in protecting her from sexually transmitted diseases? Think about it for a second. The copper T sits inside the uterus and prevents a pregnancy from taking hold, but it does absolutely nothing to stop the physical transfer of bodily fluids during the sexual act. Therefore, the answer is a firm no. The copper T will not protect her from sexually transmitted diseases. Only mechanical barriers like condoms offer protection against STDs.
All right, students, let's lock in everything we've learned with a rapid-fire rundown of the multiple-choice questions at the end of your chapter. Ready? Question 1. Asexual reproduction takes place through budding in amoeba, yeast, plasmodium, or leishmania. We literally just covered this. It's yeast. Question 2. Which of the following is not a part of the female reproductive system? Ovary, uterus, vas deferens, or fallopian tube? You got it. The vas deferens is the tube that carries sperm in males. Question 3. The anther contains sepals, ovules, pistil, or pollen grains. While the anther is part of the stamen, the male plant part, so it contains pollen grains. Fantastic work, everyone!
We have covered immense ground today, from single-celled amoebas dividing into, right up to the profound complexities of human reproduction. So, what is the ultimate takeaway? Why does all of this actually matter? Reproduction is the powerful underlying mechanism that links one generation to the next. By passing on DNA and introducing slight, vital variations along the way, reproduction ensures the survival and stability of entire populations against a constantly changing environment. But it makes you wonder, if the environment changes too drastically, faster than these subtle variations can keep up, what happens to the blueprint of life then? Keep revising, stay curious, and I will see you in the next explainer.